Persecution of Hindus refers to the religious persecution inflicted upon Hindus. In modern times, Hindus in the Muslim-majority regions of Kashmir, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan and others have also suffered persecution. Medieval persecution by Muslim rulers. Muslim conquest of the Indian subcontinent began during the early 8th century AD, when the Umayyad governor of Damascus, Hajjaj, responded to a casus belli provided by the kidnapping of Muslim women and treasures by pirates off the coast of Dabal, by mobilizing an expedition of 6,000 cavalry under Muhammad bin Qasim in 712 CE. Records from the campaign recorded in the Chachnama record temple demolitions and mass executions of resisting Sindhi forces and the enslavement of their dependents. This action was particularly extensive in Dabal, of which Qasim is reported to have been under orders to make an example of while freeing both the captured women and the prisoners of a previous, failed expedition. Bin Qasim then enlisted the support of the local Jat, Meds and Bhutto tribes and began the process of subduing and conquering the countryside. The capture of towns was also usually accomplished by means of a treaty with a party from among his enemy, who were then extended special privileges and material rewards. However, his superior Hajjaj reportedly objected to his method by saying that it would make him look weak and advocated a more hardline military strategy, saying, "Henceforth grant pardon to no one of the enemy and spare none of them, or else all will consider you a weak-minded man." Following these early instances of persecution, Bin Qasim is said to have been liberal in his religious policy. Nearly 60% of the Arab success in Sindh was secured through treaty rather than conquest. Hindus and Buddhists were treated as dhimmi and left free to practice their faith other than the obligation to pay jizya. Historian Muhammad Habib has said, "Alone among the many Muslim invaders of India, Muhammad Qasim is a character of whom a conscientious Mussalman need not be ashamed." Bin Qasim's policies were followed by the later Arab governments and Sindh prospered through the new Islamic networks of trade and commerce. Mood of Ghazni, Sultan of the Ghaznavid Empire, invaded the Indian subcontinent during the early 11th century. His campaigns across the Gangetic Plains are often cited for their iconoclast plundering and destruction of temples. Mahmud's court historian Al-Utbi viewed Mahmud's expeditions as a jihad to propagate Islam and extirpate idolatry. Mahmud may not have personally hated Hindus, but he was after the loot and welcomed the honors and accolades in the Islamic world obtained by desecrating Hindu temples and idols. Of his campaign on Mathura, it is written, "Orders were given that all the temples should be burnt with naphthala and fire and leveled with the ground. The city was given up to plunder for 20 days. Among the spoil are said to have been 5 great idols of pure gold with eyes of rubies and adornments of other precious stones, together with a vast number of smaller silver images, which, when broken up, formed a load for more than 100 camels. The loot from Mathura is estimated at 3 million rupees and over 5,000 slaves." According to military historian Victoria Schofield, Sebuktigin, the Turkish ruler of Ghazni and father of Mahmud, set as his goal the expulsion of the Hindus from the Kabul Valley and Gandhara, as the Vale of Peshawar was still called. His son and successor, the Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni, continued his work, carrying the holy war against the Hindus into India, till the year 980 CE. This area of Gandhara was under Hindus until Sebuktigin from Ghazni invaded it and displaced its last Hindu Shahi king Jayapala. Shahi was an important kingdom in northwest India at that time. According to some sources, the name of the Hindu Kush mountains of the region means Hindu kill, probably because raiders would capture Hindu slaves from the plains and take them away, but they would die of cold in the mountains. Mahmud of Ghazni sacked the second Somnath temple in 1026, looted it, and the famous Shiva Lingam of the temple was destroyed. Following the defeat of the Rajput Confederacy, after deciding to retaliate for their combined resistance, Mahmud had then set out on regular expeditions against them, leaving the conquered kingdoms in the hands of Hindu vassals, annexing only the Punjab region. By 1665, the temple, one of many, was once again ordered destroyed by Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. Mahmud utterly ruined the prosperity of the country, and performed their wonderful exploits, by which the Hindus became like atoms of dust scattered in all directions, and like a tale of old in the mouth of the people. Al-Bayuni, a historian who accompanied Mahmud of Ghazni, described the conquests in northwestern India by stating that Mahmud impoverished the region and that the civilization of the scattered Hindus declined and retreated from the northwest. This is the reason, too, why Hindu sciences have retired far away from those parts of the country conquered by us, and have fled to places which our hand cannot yet reach, to Kashmir, Benares, and other places. Holt holds an opposing view, that he was no mere robber or bloody-thirsty tyrant. Mahmud shed no blood, except in the exigencies of war, and was tolerant in dealings with his own Hindu subjects, some of whom rose to high posts in his administration, such as his Hindu general Tilak. Timur's campaign against India. Timur began a trek starting in 1397 to invade the territory of the reigning Sultan, Nasir-ud-Din Mahmud of the Tughlaq dynasty in the North Indian city of Delhi. He crossed the Indus River at Attic on 24 September. The capture of towns and villages was often followed by the massacre of their inhabitants and the raping of their women, as well as pillaging to support his massive army. Timur's invasion did not go unopposed, and he did meet some resistance during his march to Delhi, most notably by the Savdkap coalition in northern India, and the governor of Meerut. Although impressed and momentarily stalled by the valor of Ilyas Awan, Timur was able to continue his relentless approach to Delhi, arriving in 1398 to combat the armies of Sultan Mahmud, already weakened by an internal battle for ascension within the royal family. The Sultan's army was easily defeated on 17 December 1398. Timur entered Delhi and the city was sacked, destroyed, and left in ruins. Before the battle for Delhi, Timur executed more than 100,000 captives. During the ransacking of Delhi, almost all inhabitants not killed were captured and enslaved. Timur left Delhi in approximately January 1399. In April, he had returned to his own capital, beyond the Oxus. Immense quantities of spoils were taken from India, so as to erect a mosque at Samarkand, which historians today believe is the enormous Bibi Khanim Mosque. Ironically, the mosque was constructed too quickly and suffered greatly from disrepair within a few decades of its construction. When Timur invaded India in 1398–99, collection of slaves formed an important object for his army. 100,000 Hindu slaves had been seized by his soldiers and camp followers. Even a pious saint had gathered together 15 slaves. Regrettably, all had to be slaughtered before the attack on Delhi for fear that they might rebel. But after the occupation of Delhi, the inhabitants were brought out and distributed as slaves among Timur's nobles. The captives including several thousand artisans and professional people. Delhi Sultanate. Firuz Shah Tughlaq. Firuz Shah Tughlaq was the third ruler of the Tughlaq dynasty of the Delhi Sultanate. The Tarikh-i-Firuz Shah is a historical record written during his reign that attests to the systematic persecution of Hindus under his rule. In particular, it records atrocities committed against Hindu Brahmin priests who refused to convert to Islam. An order was accordingly given to the Brahmin and was brought before Sultan. The true faith was declared to the Brahmin and the right course pointed out, but he refused to accept it. A pile was risen on which the kafir with his hands and legs tied was thrown into, and the wooden tablet on the top. The pile was lit at 2 places, his head and his feet. The fire first reached him in the feet and drew from him a cry, and then fire completely enveloped him. Behold Sultan for his strict adherence to law and rectitude. Under his rule, Hindus who were forced to pay the mandatory jizya tax were recorded as infidels, their communities monitored, and if they violated imperial ordinances and built temples, they were destroyed. In particular, an incident in the village of Gohana in Haryana was recorded in the Insharai Mari, where Hindus had erected a deity and were arrested, brought to the palace and executed en masse. In 1230, the Hindu king of Odisha Ananjabhama III consolidated his rule and proclaimed that an attack on Odisha constituted an attack on the king's god. A sign of Ananjabhama's determination to protect Hindu culture is the fact that he named his new capital in Kartak, Abhinava Varanasi. His anxieties about further Muslim advances in Odisha proved to be well-founded. In the Mughal Empire, the Kesavadeo Temple in Mathura marked the place that Hindus believe was the birthplace of Sri Krishna. In 1661, Aurangzeb ordered the demolition of the temple, and constructed the Katra Masjid Mosque. Traces of the ancient Hindu temple can be seen from the back of the mosque. Aurangzeb also destroyed what was the most famous temple in Varanasi, the Vishwanath Temple. The temple had changed its location over the years, but in 1585 Akbar had authorized its location at Jayanvapi. Aurangzeb ordered its demolition in 1669 and constructed a mosque on the site, whose minarets stand 71 meters above the Ganges. Traces of the old temple can be seen behind the mosque. Centuries later, emotional debate about these wanton acts of cultural desecration continues. Aurangzeb also destroyed the Somnath Temple in 1706. In addition, during the reign of Aurangzeb, the Sikh Guru, Guru Tegh Bahadur, aided the Kashmiri Pandits in avoiding conversion to Islam and was arrested by Aurangzeb. When offered a choice between conversion to Islam and death, he chose to die rather than compromise his principles and was executed. More recently, the Hindus have claimed that Mughals destroyed the Ram Mandir in Ayodhya, located at the birthplace of Rama, and built the Babri Masjid on the holy site, which has since been a source of tension between the Hindu and Muslim communities. Following an archaeological survey, the Allahabad High Court ruled in 2010 that the Babri Masjid stood on the site of an earlier structure of a non-Islamic character, and divided the 2,400 square feet disputed land between three parties: the Ram Lalla for the construction of a temple, Sunni Wakf Board for a mosque, and the Nirmoi Akara for Sita Ki Rasura and Ram Chabutara. Writer Fernand Braudel wrote in A History of Civilizations, Islamic rule in India as a colonial experiment was extremely violent, and the Muslims could not rule the country except by systematic terror. Cruelty was the norm. Burnings, summary executions, crucifixions or impalements, inventive tortures. Hindu temples were destroyed to make way for mosques. On occasion there were forced conversions. If ever there were an uprising, it was instantly and savagely repressed. Houses were burned, the countryside was laid waste. Men were slaughtered and women were taken as slaves. Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. There are historians who state that Tipu Sultan was a religious persecutor of Hindus. C.K. Karim also notes that Tipu Sultan issued an edict for the destruction of Hindu temples in Kerala. Hindu groups revile Tipu Sultan as a bigot who massacred Hindus. He was known to carry out forced conversions of Hindus and Christians. Tipu got Runmus Khan, the Nawab of Karul, to launch a surprise attack upon the Kadava Hindus who were besieged by the invading Muslim army. 500 were killed and over 40,000 Kadavas fled to the woods and concealed themselves in the mountains. Thousands of Kadava Hindus were seized along with the Raja and held captive at Seringapatam. They were also subjected to forcible conversions to Islam, death, and torture. In Seringapatam, the young men who were forcibly circumcised were incorporated into the Armady Corps, and they formed 8 rishalas or regiments. The actual number of cadavers that were captured in the operation is unclear. The British administrator Mark Wilkes gives it as 70,000. Historian Louis Rice arrives at the figure of 85,000, while Mir Kierman's score for the Korg campaign is 80,000 men, women and child prisoners. In a letter to Runmus Khan, Tipu himself stated, "We proceeded with the utmost speed, and, at once, made prisoners of 40,000 occasion-seeking and sedition-exciting Korjis, who, alarmed at the approach of our victorious army, had slunk into woods, and concealed themselves in lofty mountains, inaccessible even to birds. Then, carrying them away from their native country, we raised them to the honor of Islam, and incorporated them into our Ahmadi corps." In 1788, Tipu ordered his governor in Calicut Sher Khan to begin the process of converting Hindus to Islam, and in July of that year, 200 Brahmins were forcibly converted and made to eat beef. Mohibul Hassan, Professor Sheikh Ali, and other historians cast great doubt on the scale of the deportations and forced conversions in Korg in particular, and Hassan says that the British versions of what happened were intended to malign Tipu Sultan, and to be used as propaganda against him. He argues that little reliance can be placed in Muslim accounts such as Kierman's Nishani-Haidari, in their anxiety to represent the Sultan as a champion of Islam. They had a tendency to exaggerate and distort the facts. Kirmani claims that 70,000 Korjis were converted, when 40 years later the entire population of Korg was still less than that number. According to Ramchandra Rao Punganuri, the true number of converts was about 500. Tipu sent a letter on 19 January 1790 to the governor of Bikal, Budruzuman Khan. It says, "Don't you know I have achieved a great victory recently in Malabar and over 4 lakh Hindus were converted to Islam. I am determined to march against that cursed Raman Nair very soon, since I am overjoyed at the prospect of converting him and his subjects to Islam. I have happily abandoned the idea of going back to Srirangapattanam now." The following is a translation of an inscription on the stone found at Seringapatam, which was situated in a conspicuous place in the fort. "O Almighty God, dispose the whole body of infidels, scatter their tribe, cause their feet to stagger, overthrow their councils, change their state, destroy their very root, cause death to be near them, cut off from them the means of sustenance, shorten their days, be their bodies the constant object of their cares, deprive their eyes of sight, make black their faces." He also corresponded with the Sringeri Shankaracharya, expressing grief and indignation at a raid by Maratha banded horsemen, which killed many and plundered the monastery of its valuable possessions, patronized the Melkote Temple, for which a Kannada decree was issued that the Sri Vishnava invocatory verses there should be recited in the traditional form. Tipu Sultan also presented 4 silver cups to the Lakshmikanta temple at Kalala and probably presented the Ranganatha temple at Srirangapatana with 7 silver cups and a silver camphor burner. Some historians have argued that these acts happened after the Third Mysore War, where he had to negotiate on the terms of surrender. They claim that these acts were motivated by a political desire to get the support of his Hindu subjects. Historian Hayavardhana C. Rao wrote about Tipu in his encyclopedic work on the history of Mysore. He asserted that Tipu's religious fanaticism and the excesses committed in the name of religion, both in Mysore and in the provinces, stand condemned for all time. His bigotry, indeed, was so great that it precluded all ideas of toleration. He further asserts that the acts of Tipu that were constructive towards Hindus were largely political and ostentatious rather than an indication of genuine tolerance. In Kashmir, the Hindu minority in Kashmir has also been historically persecuted by Muslim rulers. While Hindus and Muslims lived in harmony for certain periods of time, several Muslim rulers of Kashmir were intolerant of other religions. Sultan Sikandar Butch Khan of Kashmir is often considered the worst of these. Historians have recorded many of his atrocities. The Tariq-i-Firishta records that Sikandar persecuted the Hindus and issued orders prescribing the residency of any other than Muslims in Kashmir. He also ordered the breaking of all golden and silver images. The Tariq-i-Firishta further states, many of the Brahmins, rather than abandon their religion or their country, poisoned themselves. Some emigrated from their native homes, while a few escaped the evil of banishment by becoming Mohammedans. After the emigration of the Brahmins, Sikandar ordered all the temples in Kashmir to be thrown down. Having broken all the images in Kashmir, acquired the title of Destroyer of Idols. During European rule of the Indian subcontinent, Goa, the Goa Inquisition was established in 1560 by Portuguese missionaries in Portuguese India, aimed primarily at new Christian converts who were thought to have returned to their original Hindu or Islamic faith. It is recorded to have executed 57 apostates until its abolition in 1774. According to Teotonio de Souza, the Hindus faced severe persecution with great fortitude under the Portuguese in Goa. Vicar General Miguel Vaz had written to the King of Portugal in 1543 from Goa requesting that the Inquisition be established in Goa as well. 3 years later, Francis Xavier made a similar request in view of the Muslims in the region and the Christians abandoning their faith. On hearing of the excesses of the Inquisition in Goa, Lourenço Perez, Portuguese ambassador at Rome, expressed his displeasure to the crown while warning that this zeal for religion was actually becoming of disservice to God and the kingdom. Again, according to de Souza, the Inquisition was bad for its victims and led to the downfall of the Portuguese Empire in the East. In 1620, an order was passed to prohibit the Hindus from performing their marriage rituals. Charles Dellin experienced firsthand the cruelty of the Inquisition's agents. He published a book in 1687 describing his experiences in Goa. L'Inquisition de Goa. British colonial India. The British East India Company engaged in a covert and well-financed campaign of evangelical conversions in the 19th century. While officially discouraging conversions, officers of the company routinely converted sepoys to Christianity, often by force. This was one of the factors that led to the Indian Rebellion of 1857.